Basically, there's 3 or 4 things you have to do to set it up properly. The first thing is the trim, which matches your instrument and your playing style to the amplifier. It's a very important feature, and we'll go into it in detail. Then there's the voicing filters, which are located on these knobs. They're all push. They go blue when you push them, and they change the voicing of the amplifier. That would be the second thing you would be adjusting. And the last thing would be the equalizer. So we'll go through each section, and then we'll go into the overdrive controls, which are these in the middle. We'll do that last after we set up the amplifier. So let's start with trim. What is trim? Most amplifiers, including ours, have a switch on right by the input jack. It's called an active passive or a pad, and it either attenuates the input signal 10 dB or 14 dB. But it allows you to put in an active bass, which is hotter than a passive, and you put in the pad, and it stops it from overdriving the input. The problem with that kind of a switch is you only have a choice of either 0 or 14 dB. You don't get the exact setting that would be optimum for your playing style and your instrument. So with this amplifier, which has 3 12AX7s in it, by the way, you're going right into a tube, and it's really hard to overdrive that tube stage. He has a passive Fender Jazz here, and we'll hit that first and see what happens. You always start adjusting with the trim on 10, all the way up. That's your highest gain position, and that's where you want it to be if you're not clipping. So let's see if he can make it clip. If it were going to clip, this white light would turn red. So he wasn't able to make it clip. So for this amplifier with just about any passive bass, you just leave the trim control dimed. So let's take a look at a hot active bass and see what happens. Now Forrest has switched over to an active bass as on, which is a very hot bass. And we'll just hit a couple of notes. You'll see this clip light, it starts flashing red. And in this amplifier with the tube input stage, actually that might not be too bad. You might like a little growl from the input tube. But we're going to dial it out, and so you can see what happens. And what's the beauty of having this being adjustable? It's just not a switch. You can tune it exactly to where you want it to be with the right amount of growl for what your playing style. So he'll just start playing, and I'll bring it back. That's about where you want it. So it just flashes occasionally. So you can't do that with a switch. You got one choice or the other. Now you can set it up just precisely for how you want it. And with this amplifier, you can get a little extra growl in your input if you want by, pushing it a little harder into the clipping. All right, so that's the trim control. Okay, so we're back to the passive bass. I have dimed the trim control, which is what we determined earlier was what was the best for this kind of an instrument. Now we're going to talk about the voicing filters, and this amplifier's got a lot of them. Right off the bat, on the input stage, on the trim control, you push it and it goes to a feature called voice, and that's a kind of a modern voice, and it really revoices the whole amplifier, like all the voicing filters do, but it does it a little bit different way. So I'm going to just turn it on and off while Forrest plays. Okay, I'll turn it off. We'll go on. The next voicing filter is called bump. It's located on the bass control knob, And this adds kind of like a bloom to the low end. It really fattens it up. And if you're in a dead room like this studio, it's a really nice feature to have. But sometimes when you're in a hot room, like a club with not many people in it, which is not too unusual, especially these days, it can be very echoey and the bass can bounce around the room, so you might want to turn that off. So I'll show you what it does. You'll just go ahead and hit it again. Next control we're going to talk about is the contour. Contour boosts the highs and the lows, and it drops out the mids. And we do that all simultaneously so that the amplifier sounds that it's about the same volume. If you just drop the mids, you lose volume and you have to adjust all your controls. So you can turn these things on and off on our amps. You don't have to adjust the tone, the levels. So you'll go ahead and we'll do it again. That's a feature that we first put in the 800RB long before anybody dreamed about doing that. That was in 1980. It's a feature that stayed alive. It's in all of our amps since. Next feature is a high cut. And this is nice if you've got really crispy strings or you got a horn that's really bright. It'll take that edge off of the attack and sort of smooth out your playing a little bit. So the last voicing filter in the clean section is presence. And, presence is a nice feature if you don't have a horn. If you have a horn, it can get a little bit crispy, but some people even like it, with the horn. So I'll turn it on and off. We do have a horn on in this cabinet so that you can actually hear the difference. We've gone over the trim control, we've gone over the voicing filters, now we're going to go into the equalizer. Now the equalizer is 4 bands, it always has been since the 800RB in 1980. What's unique about the equalizer though is that it's active, serial, variable Q. Most amplifiers, well I shouldn't say most, virtually all of them, just use a very simple equalizer and it doesn't take very many parts to do that. But you end up with an equalizer that can sound weird. This is an active serial variable Q equalizer. It's got about 50 parts in it. It's all tube. So you come into the amplifier, you got a tube on the input stage, then you go through several tube stages for the equalizer, and there's 2 tube stages dedicated to the overdrive circuit. So I guess, we've got bass, low, mid, high, mid, and treble. And when you adjust these mid-range controls, that's where the variable Q comes in. When you cut them, they're a high Q cut. When you boost them, they're a low Q cut, a low Q boost. So they don't sound weird or honky. If you have a high Q boost, it can sound like you're talking into a tin can. So if you just play, I'll just go through and adjust each one through its range. So I've done what each control does individually. I'm going to start mixing them up with the contour switches and move them through the ranges. And I'm going to go to some extremes to demonstrate how much it can vary, but it just doesn't sound weird or strange. That's the whole idea. So let's just get started. Now the overdrive isn't meant to be like a buzz box or, like these effect pedals you get. There's plenty of overdrive flavors you can get in a pedal. We're just trying to give you the feel of an amplifier at its limit, especially a tube type amp starting to break up and it starts that growly sound, which we're kind of famous for. The difference being here, it's all tubes that do it. The tubes are set up like the input stage of a tube power amp. That's what we're overdriving, so it gives a lot of that tube power amp artifact. And there's some controls for adjusting the tone. On the level control, there's a switch called body. Oh, I got to turn it into that channel. There's a switch called body, which increases the low end going into the overdrive stage. And there's an edge control, and that you can change the tone at the high end coming after the distortion stage. You can cut it or boost how bright that it sounds. And there is a high cut feature. And if you are playing with a horn and you channel switch into your overdrive circuit, it can get too bright, too crispy, too glassy sounding. So we have a feature here that we'll put a high cut in to your overdrive sound, but when you switch out, it goes away, and you have your normal full bandwidth. Okay, so we've just gone over the front panel features. Now we're going to talk about the rear panel. This rear panel setup is the same on the Legacy and Fusion heads, all the 500, 800, and 1200. So we'll start off, of course, you got a detachable power cord, a power switch on and off. The DI circuit has, of course, the DI input, and then a ground lift switch. You can lift pin 1. And that helps you if you got a problem. If your mixer is grounded differently, you flip this to the other polarity. And then there's a pre-post switch, and that means in pre, it means the DI is coming off of the amplifier before the equalizer, and post means that signal's coming out of the amplifier after the equalizer. Then we have a foot switch. You can turn on and off the overdrive with that. A tuner output, and then a send-in return jacks, which are also all 1/4 inch. And then 2 speak-ons, so you can connect 2 cabinets. Now this amplifier will put out 800 watts into 2 ohms, 2.7 ohms, or 4 ohms. So 2 ohms would be 2 4-ohm cabinets, for example, 1 in each connector. And when you do that, we have a impedance selector switch here that sets up the amplifier to drive that load. So if you're in 2 ohms, you put the switch down on the bottom where it says 4 plus 4. That means 2 4-ohm cabinets, 1 in each jack. If you're driving a very common combination in our industry is an 8-ohm 115 underneath a 4-ohm 10. And that is at 2.7 ohms. And so you put the switch in the middle for that load, and it says 4 plus 8. So it's very clear what you're talking about. If you're doing a 4-ohm cabinet or above, you put the switch on top, and you get 800 watts into 4 ohms and 400 watts into 8 ohms. And as you go up in impedance, of course, the power drops. If you look on the side, you see 2 fans. The fans are temperature controlled, which means when the amplifier is cool, they don't run, which means they're not sucking dust and debris into your amplifier. In fact, they usually run at very low speed. You can't even hear them run, even when you stick your ear to when they're running at slow speed. And they're not bringing in much debris in that case either. It's when you play in a hot sun or you're really driving the amp hard, these fans will rev up and really, pull a lot of air through. And so the nice thing about having them temperature controlled variable is that your amp stays clean inside. Even after years of work, you open them up and they're clean inside. Starting with the 800 RB, our amplifiers have pretty much been aluminum. This amplifier is 100% aluminum, and the finish is anodized. We don't paint them because anodized doesn't chip, doesn't discolor, and doesn't wear out over time. It just stays beautiful just the way it is the day you bought it. And all the graphics, like you'll see here, or the graphics on the front panel, those are not printed on with paint like a silkscreen process. They're laser etched into the anodized surface. They're never going to fade. They're never going to chip. They're never going to go away. They're going to just stay like that. In 10 years, it's going to look just like the day you bought it. Then on the inside, we don't use cables to interconnect our circuit boards. We use other multi-layer circuit boards that have shielding in them, and all the connectors are gold on gold. The problem with normal connecting situations where they use a cable and tin-plated connectors is over time those connectors vibrate, they build up a little corrosion wall, and they become intermittent. I've seen this in our products. They get to be 5 or 10 years old, and you start having these interconnection problems. So I went gold on gold. They're never going to corrode. They're never going to have that problem. And the multi-layer boards give shielding to all the wires, so there's not going to be any extraneous hum or outside noises getting into the product. The other thing on this amplifier, which has 3 12AX7 tubes in it, we also generate a 300-volt supply for the plates.